Let's go ahead and get this show started. Hi, Keely. Everyone, I would like to welcome track announcer extraordinaire, as soon as the air conditioner comes on, Vic Stauffer. Give him a big round of applause. Good morning, Vic.
Good morning. Thank you. The first thing I'm going to tell you is I've been doing this for 35 years, and I've probably done 100 shows like this. If this was any other racetrack on any other day, it would be canceled because nobody would have showed up. Literally, not one person would have showed up. And when I come in and see that there's a half 100 of you, maybe more, it doesn't surprise me because the fan base here at Oaklawn is like no other, literally like no other. And it just, it is so gratifying, and we appreciate it so much. I wouldn't come here if I was a duck, and I would like the weather if I was a duck. You guys came out here this morning to enjoy Nancy's presentation and talk horse racing with me, and I'm truly humbled by that. Believe me when I tell you, most places would either blow it off, or even if they didn't blow it off, nobody would come. Nancy can attest to that as too. So thank you so much for coming.
Well, no, that's not his wife. So
No, but my wife could hear.
I was joking with Vic yesterday, but not really, that I knew with him as a guest, I could pretty much introduce him and put down the mic, go get a cup of coffee, and then come back 30 minutes later. So I'm just going to intro you, but I want, as I mentioned earlier to the group, most people that get involved in thoroughbred racing are family related. They get into it as a family business. But you, however, entered as a fan. Explain how you got into the sport and transitioned into the role of announcer.
Yeah, I literally, I have an 8th grade education. I stopped going to school after the 8th grade because I knew I was going to spend the rest of my life on the racetrack. And I could have got all A's in high school and gone to a 4-year college and got a scholarship and all of that, but I knew that would only postpone going to the racetrack for 7 years. So, but Nancy's right. When I was very young, my grandfather would take me to Hollywood Park. This is such a bygone era that I remember that he wouldn't take me on the weekends because you couldn't get there because of the traffic and because you couldn't get a good seat. And Hollywood Park held 50,000 people at the time. So it's a different day and age now. But he would take me on the weekdays, and I found myself falling in love with horse racing. And then our family moved to San Diego, and in the summertime, I would go to Del Mar. And even when Del Mar wasn't running, I found a way to find horse racing because in those days there was a racetrack in Tijuana, Mexico, of all places, called Caliente. And I would go down there on the weekends and watch the races there. And when we would go out to Del Mar in the summertime, we were all high schoolers, so we were all looking at the girls, but my buddies more than me because I was looking at the racing form. And I fell in love with that as much as the girls. And even more so than that, what I fell in love with was a gentleman by the name of Harry Henson. Harry was the iconic voice of Del Mar and Hollywood Park at that time. Unarguably, one of the top 3 or 4 announcers that ever lived. And when he would call a horse race, it just sounded and even more so felt different. And when I would listen to Harry call and the way I reacted to what he was seeing, I knew that was something that I wanted to try doing. So I am truly blessed because when I was 15 years old, 45 years ago, I knew exactly what I was going to do every day for the rest of my life. And what a gift that is. And I'm here today just as excited about it as I was the first time I ever walked into the racetrack. I can honestly and proudly say I've never done an honest day's work. If I had to have a real job, I'd probably be a ward of the court or on welfare. But somehow, some way, I've been allowed to keep coming to the racetrack, keep getting a free program and lunch, and getting to watch these incredible animals do their thing. So I truly am. You're looking at a person that's truly is blessed. I mean, I found what I wanted to do, and I'm more excited about doing it now than I was 45 years ago.
So tell us about your first venture into race calling, and you've called at a lot of racetracks.
I have. My wife,
Across
Tina.
the country.
My wife, Tina, who I wouldn't be able to do it without, because it is not easy being a racetrack wife. I can tell you that. We figured out the other day that I've called at least one race at 63 different racetracks. At least one.
And you and I have both worked at a lot of racetracks that no longer exist.
Yeah, I actually kind of was the Grim Reaper for racetracks for a while. Because racetracks that I worked at tended, not long after they hired me, to just go out of business. It happened at Hialeah, it happened at the Woodlands, it happened at Exarban, and then the big one, Nancy and I both killed Hollywood Park, which you wouldn't think was possible, but somehow after 75 years of the greatest racing on the planet, Hollywood Park went out of business.
I cried.
That to this day, it feels like having lost a loved one. I do a lot of work for TVG in the off season. TVG, if you don't know what it is, it's sort of like ESPN for horse racing. And I live in Las Vegas, and so when I work at TVG, I fly in to Los Angeles. And when you fly into Los Angeles, you fly right over Hollywood Park, or where Hollywood Park used to be. I don't look out the window, because if I do, I'm going to get upset and tear up. I was there 13 years, and I thank the good Lord for every single day that they allowed me to be at that racetrack. Nancy and I were on the staff together. Nancy was the stall man there, and it's a very important job, much more important than the announcer, I can tell you that.
Yeah, you deal with about 100 different personalities on a daily basis with some high-maintenance trainers, but it's very interesting how certain announcers operate. And I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of announcers. Some use how they mark up their programs. Some use crayon. Some use highlighters. Some don't use anything at all. And if you ever have the opportunity to go into an announcer's booth, how when horses come on the track, how they use different memorization skills, it's so interesting. And I think we should do a Facebook Live one day about this. How do you, in particular, do your memorization prior to a race?
I'm pretty old school. I don't really use any tools with it. To me, it's literal memorization, taking a look at, basically the main thing that you look at in memorization is that you look at the silks or the shirts that the jockeys are wearing. And you'll see a field come out onto the racetrack, and you'll just basically go through, and you'll know number one is red, and you'll memorize his name, and you'll go on through the field. Now, you may get a field with 7 horses, or with 12 horses, and 7 of them have predominantly red silks. Well, if that case, then you can use other forms of identification. You can look at what color the cap is that a jockey's wearing. You can look at if it's a gray horse, like Long Station, who runs today. He's the easiest horse in the world to remember because he's just like a big white tornado out there. So he's easy always to remember. You can look at literally the size of the jockeys. Kelsey Haar is probably 5'6" or 5'7". She's a tall person. Fernando de la Cruz and some of the other guys are very short. And actually, you can tell the difference, and you can use that to identify. Does the horse wear blinkers or not? Does it have a shadow roll? Once upon a time, D. Wayne Lucas and Todd Pletcher horses were very, very easy because they were so well known for having these incredibly bright, sun-bright white bridles. So anything that you can use to help you identify the horse. I'll tell you one thing that's very interesting, and that is you will hear any announcer that doesn't call year-round. You will hear any announcer that when they come into a meet, and it happens to me at this meet every year, that the first couple of weeks, I won't be quite as sharp as I am in the weeks after that. And there's 2 reasons for it. One, I'm just a little rusty because I hadn't called races in 8 months. And there's a story as to why, and I'll tell you that as well. But the second thing is once a horse comes back, once you have seen that horse just one time and memorized it the race before, believe it or not, you actually do remember that horse from the time before, and it becomes much easier to memorize them. Some fields, I'll take the entire 11 minutes that we have for the post parade, and I'll use that entire time. Some fields, they come out onto the racetrack, and in 30 seconds, I know who they are. Like the mile and 3/16 race we ran the other day with Mine Your Own Malone, who won. Those guys, we've seen them so many times, and so they can come out of the paddock and go right to the starting gate, and I would know who they are. So that's basically the way you memorize. Yeah, there was one other part I was going to tell you, and then I forgot, but it'll come back to my mind. So, but yeah, that's how you do it.
So what are easier?
What's that?
Oh, why it's harder to call races coming off the 8-month layoff, and why you?
Oh, well, it's the 8-month. Now, thank you for that, because it makes me remember the story. When Hollywood Park went out of business, I was 100% sure, more than 100% sure, that I would never call races again. If you get to play center fielder for the Yankees, you're not going to go and be the backup catcher for the Toledo Mud Hens. It's not going to happen. At least it wasn't for me. I called some of the greatest horses to ever race. And so I wasn't going to go and call a bunch of 8-claimers on a night racetrack. It wasn't going to happen. That all changed when Oaklawn called, because the racing program we have here is commensurate to what we had at Hollywood Park. Think about Zenyatta. Zenyatta raced here. She raced in Hollywood Park. So, and many others. So, coming back to racing, the only reason I did was because of Oaklawn. I honestly don't think that had Oaklawn not called, I'm pretty sure I would have been retired full-time from being an announcer. And the 57 days I call at Oaklawn right now, that's it. I have all kinds of other things that I like to do with my life. I have other interests now. I'm getting older, so want to have some different experiences. My wife and I want to travel quite a bit, and so if somebody else wanted me to call some races in the meantime, between when we're here open for the 57 days at Oaklawn, I'm not interested. All I'm interested in is Oaklawn, and the reason I'm interested in Oaklawn is this. The fact that there's 60 of you here now, and it's the cataclysm's coming. It's just phenomenal. It's really special, very special.
So, Vic, what's easier to call, a 6-furlong sprint or a mile route?
The answer to that question is, you would be surprised to believe this, but when I make mistakes, it is in the races that you would think would be the easiest races to call. People would say, well, if the horses start here in front of you and you have extra time to handicap the horses and to look at them and memorize them and get ready. And one of the things I do before the race is I'll be in my announcer's booth and I sort of make a mock practice call going through the horses as I'm memorizing them, and it also helps me get a little bit of a rhythm. But interestingly enough, most of the terrible mistakes that I've made in my career, and believe me, I've made a whole lot of them, as I've called just around 47,000 horse races, are short fields going long rather than full 12-horse fields starting way out there. I don't know what happens, but there's some sort of mind focus. It also changes the rhythm of a race. For example, let's say, like when Tiger Bait broke her maiden. She won by 14 lengths. That's a very unusual thing to happen in a race call. It doesn't happen maybe a half a dozen times at an entire race meet. And so you can be more prone to making a bad call there or not really knowing what to say because it's something that's so very different. That's why the greatest race call that was ever made and will have ever been made is Chick Anderson's call of Secretariat winning the Belmont Stakes by 31 lengths. Because I guarantee you he went through 100 different scenarios of what might happen in that race. He never thought that the horse was going to win by 31 lengths and run in 159 and change, or 228, 224, or whatever he ran. That wasn't part of it. And so for him to be able to describe under the world's eye, and this horse doing something that literally had never been done before or since, and make a call that we still remember to this day. He's moving like a tremendous machine. The rest of the horses are a 16th of a mile behind, and to have the wherewithal to be able to still capture a race that we were all going to be listening to 50 years later, that was truly a great race call. I don't know. I might have just hyperventilated and collapsed. There's a chance that could have happened to me. So the answer to the question is the races that would seem easiest sometimes are the toughest. For some reason, when I have 5 horses on the racetrack or 6, I have a tougher time memorizing them than when I have 12. I don't know why. It's just something in the brain that I think you make it feel like you think it'll be easier. I'll tell you another trick that happens, and I don't even know why this happens. But let's say there's 12 horses, and when I get to one of them, every time I get to that horse, let's call it Long Station, every time I get to him, I don't know who he is when I'm warming up the horses. I don't know who he is. So I have to look down at my program, and then I have to say his name over and over and over again. It doesn't help. I don't know who he is. And so I'm afraid I'm not going to remember his name in the race call as well. The way that I end up knowing who he is and actually knowing him better than the other 12 is because I know he's the horse that I don't know. Does that make sense?
You're setting yourself up, basically.
Yeah.
Almost.
It's if I keep getting to a horse and I can't come up with his name, I'll finally go, oh, that's the horse I can't come up with his name, and then I'll know his name better than the other 11. So it's a very strange thing that I had a doctor tell me one time that because, see, I'm proving Nancy's point about just being able to prattle on. I had a doctor tell me when I was a young man that because I have such a hyperacute short-term memory, I memorize 12 horses, get them out of my head, memorize 12 more, get them out of my head, and I do it every 25 minutes, that it would adversely affect my long-term memory. And he was right. He was right. My wife is here. What was your name again, darling?
Yeah, the deja vu horse, you kind of beat that one with a stick. Okay, talking about short fields, a short field is today's 7th race, the co-feature, the 73rd running of the Hot Springs. And it's a 6-horse field and possibly will be a 5 with a potential defector. The even money favorite is Whitmore. Going into this race, Vic, Whitmore could potentially become scoring his 3rd Hot Springs. Do you kind of play out a scenario with Whitmore coming down to the lane or coming to the wire first, anticipating a winning call for Whitmore?
Sure, I do. There are 2 schools of thought. Some people think that you shouldn't have a preconceived idea of what you want to say. I don't agree with that. When you ad lib, oftentimes it sounds like you're ad libbing. And so I know that Whitmore's trying for his 3rd Hot Springs, and if he looks like he's going to win, I'll probably work it into the race call, or at least on the gallop out when the horses are past the wire. This is live play-by-play. It's just like if a guy is standing at the plate and hits a long drive to left center field, and the center fielder's going back and the left fielder's coming over, and is it gone or is it not? You want to try to report what you see. But if that home run was Barry Bonds' 762nd home run, you're not going to treat it like just any old home run. And so, in my estimation, the greatest announcer that ever lived is a man named Tom Durkin. Tom was the voice of the New York Racing Association for 30 years. He called the first 23 Breeders' Cups. He's called many Triple Crowns. I've spent time with Tom Durkin in his announcer's booth, and he has a loose leaf binder full of different things that he might potentially say about a particular horse winning a particular Breeders' Cup race. So on a particular weekend, there might be 14 Breeders' Cup races. Tom has 14 binders and then a page for each and every one of the horses that could potentially win. That's preparation. And like I said, some people think that that's cheating. I don't. I don't. And we only get one take. And you see great acting performances or you hear great songs recorded. Well, they've had multiple chances to get it just right. Race callers and any other live play-by-play announcers only get one shot at it. And if you mess it up, especially in a graded stakes race, if you mess it up, you get to live with that the rest of your life. Or if you make a good call, then you get attaboys for the rest of your life. Here's another thing about good calls. They don't have a heck of a lot to do with the announcer. They have entirely to do with the horse.
With the performance.
I called the races at the Woodlands in Kansas City, Kansas, and believe me, I made just as good of race calls as I did when I was at Hollywood Park. The only difference was at Hollywood Park, I called Zenyatta and Lava Man and Cesario. And so now people, they say, oh, wow, that call, that was just such an amazing thing, the way you called Zenyatta. All I did was describe to you how I felt about what I was seeing her do. And that's when you can convey that passion that you feel because you're seeing this once-in-a-lifetime horse, that's what makes it a good call. It has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the subject matter. Al Michaels got to see, if the Americans had lost 13-4 to the Russians in the Olympics at Lake Placid, nobody would have talked about the great call that Al Michaels made for that game. But they won, and he got to work in, and it was not an ad lib, "Do you believe in miracles?" One of the most iconic sports calls any time. He didn't just come up with that with about 12 seconds to go in the game. He knew 3 weeks before that game that if he got to that position, he was going to say what he said. And we're still talking about it today. So prep work in race calls and knowing what you want to say, to me, is extremely important.
So you kind of have certain tags, I've noticed. A lot of times when horses are going down the lane and they make a certain run late, straight and strong, and yes. Yeah,
I stole yes from Marv Albert. I admit it. I've listened to him call basketball and baseball games for many years, and I liked that, yes. Straight and strong is my own, and I will use it. If I use it 5 times at a meet, that's a lot. Sometimes I'll go a whole meet and not use it, because if you hear me say that, then I feel like I'm seeing something extra special on the racetrack, or an incredibly dominant performance on the racetrack. So that's my way of kind of telling you, this is a race that you might want to take a second look at, or this horse might end up going on. And like the first time Amy's Challenge ran here this year, I used straight and strong because she was. And then she came back and she won the Spring Fever, and she was even straighter and stronger. I didn't use it again in her case, but you need the right scenario too. I'll tell you a story about my first Arkansas Derby, that is Classic Empire. My first year here at Oaklawn, I was sick the whole meet. I didn't know that I was sick. Well, I knew that I was sick. I just didn't know what was wrong. And as a result, I called the races like a complete idiot. I was just awful for almost the whole meet. I had a thing called hyperparathyroidism, where this huge thing grows in your neck and you don't know it, but it makes you incredibly tired. It makes you lethargic, and you just feel like after you've been up for 15 minutes, you feel like you want to go back to bed and go to sleep for the rest of the night again. And I was sick for the whole meet, and I didn't realize it. And I finally started coming around, making okay race calls towards the end of the season. But I had it in my mind that if Classic Empire was to win the Arkansas Derby, I had the perfect call ready for it, because he was some sort of a question mark, because he had won the Breeders' Cup juvenile dirt, but then after that he had been terrible, and they couldn't get him run. They couldn't even get him to train, much less run. So I had it in my mind that if he was going to win, I had a call ready for him, and I got so myopically focused on making just the call.
I'm going to hold on for 1 second. Anybody, if you are in a gray Ford truck with Texas plates in front of the game room, you need to move it ASAP. Texas truck, a gray Texas truck with gray Ford truck with Texas plates in front of the game room, you need to move it now. Thank you. I'm sorry, Vic.
So another thing about race calling, I will tell you, is I put my heart and soul into every single race call, whether it's $12,500 Arkansas bred maidens or the Arkansas Derby. But they're not the same, and people don't view them as the same. And when you call races at an elite level like I do, you're basically judged by about a half dozen race calls every year. First of all, without a doubt, the Arkansas Derby. You can call every single race absolutely, technically perfect. And if you screw up the Arkansas Derby, it's a bad year. That really matters. In my case, in Los Angeles, it was the Hollywood Gold Cup and the Swap Stakes and the American Oaks, races like that, the Vanity. So anyway, getting back to Classic Empire, that meet, I was, like, for instance, that year I made a terrible call in the Rebel. There was a horse, a Mike Langford horse that Steve Asmussen trains. I forgot his name at mid-stretch. I can't even think of it right now. But so I was so focused, so myopically focused to make a good, sound, clear, concise race call in the Arkansas Derby. And I did with Classic Empire, and it turned out I forgot the punchline. And that was, the Empire Strikes Back, which would have been cool. But at that particular time, I just was so determined to make a good call in the Arkansas Derby my first year here that I forgot to use that line.
Pretty clever, though. I like
Yeah, I thought it would work. I mean, it wasn't too over the top or too schmaltzy.
Maybe a post-it note.
Yeah. Last year it worked out okay, because I knew and I thought of it. Some people say you shouldn't do this. I disagree. But I knew that if Magna Moon wins, I was going to say, look out, Kentucky, there's a bad moon on the rise. And it played well. People liked it. It would have been a lot more of a... See, here's another thing about calling great races and great horses. They have to go on and do great things later, or those calls get forgotten.
Sadly,
like if Magna Moon had won the Kentucky Derby, we would have got to listen to my call of the Arkansas Derby a whole lot more times.
So yesterday, if you were here, the first couple of races, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It was so bad. You felt like you were in the Bay Area. I thought the call was hysterical.
The first?
Yeah. So it was a route race. What was it, a mile and a 16th?
Mile and 16th, yeah.
And Vic threw out stakes nominations, closings, University of Arkansas recruit. I thought it was pretty funny.
You're saying that like you may have heard people that didn't think it was funny.
Maybe.
Well, tell me about that. I want to hear what input.
Well, a couple of horsemen didn't think. Well, I thought it was funny.
You know.
But when you can't see, what are you supposed to do?
What are you supposed to do?
Yeah, right.
That's what I thought.
I did think International Sound did a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
Because on the TV, yeah.
Yeah. And in retrospect, had I known they were going to do such a good job, I might have used the Stewart's Views camera a little bit more. I understand why a horseman would. I understand why a horseman or somebody that bets a lot of money wouldn't like that race call. I get it, because
I thought it was clever, personally.
they put a month into that horse to run in that race, and the whole thing takes a minute and a half. And it's a very, very important thing. It's a very, very emotional thing.
Well, the announcer's call doesn't affect the outcome of the race.
No, it doesn't, but there certainly are people that think it does. that I can promise you. And then if you had a big bet on the race, I guess you could, but you will hear announcers around the country, and I think more so than any announcer in the country, I understand the gravity of these races, these animals, these jockeys, these connections, and I treat it with the respect that it's due. I really believe that. That's one of the hallmarks of my career. Is I'm a horseman myself, just like Nancy. We own racehorses. I've been a jockey's agent before, so I know what it's like to work with these incredible gladiators that go out there and risk their lives every day. Usually Twitter gives you an idea of how you did, whether it was good or not, and Twitter liked the call. So you have to make a decision, and I thought about it for a long time. I actually consulted my wife Tina and asked her what she thought. I called a couple of other announcers around the country. One of them, the former voice of Oaklawn Park, Frank Miramati, because Frank is well known for making many very obscure and sort of strange race calls. And I ran it by him. What do you think about this? And he said, go for it. The last thing that I would ever do is I would disrespect a race at Oaklawn Park. That's never going to happen. I don't think I did that. I think I couldn't see the damn horses. I had to say something.
Again, I thought it was clever. Does anybody have any questions for Vic? Yes, sir.
So you spoke of Marv Albert. Are there any other publicly dressed up announcers like in college football or anything that you admire?
The answer,
Repeat the question. Repeat the question so everybody can.
Yeah, the question was, I spoke about Marv Albert, and were there any other announcers in any sports that I admire? Very much so. I grew up in Southern California in Los Angeles, and what an era for listening to sports announcers. When I was a kid and I would listen to the games on the radio, we had, in baseball, we had Dick Enberg and Vin Scully. In basketball, we had Chick Hearn and Ralph Lawler. In roller derby and all of that, we had a guy. I know his name just escaped me. I'll think of it. In hockey, we had Bob Miller, who was one of the great hockey announcers ever. College basketball, college football, and I remember trying to take little bits of what they did. I mean, Vin Scully, the man that called the Dodgers for 60 years. The greatest announcer, sports announcer that ever lived, in my estimation. And he was just as good because of the prep work he put into it when he was 80 as he was when he was 35. So yeah, race calling, I definitely have one person that affected my career. That's Tom Durkin, without a doubt. There are some great race callers out there. Harry was great. Trevor Denman, no getting around it. Terry Wallace had a lot of influence on my race calls, but none like Tom Durkin. Tom Durkin changed the face of race calling. He changed it from a public address to a play-by-play on television. And he realized 40 years ago, 90% of the people that watched a horse race were physically here on track, and they would listen to that call over the public address. Tom was the first one to realize that shifted with the advent of simulcasting, and that 95% of the people weren't on track. At other places, it's 99%. Here, it's about 80% because we have such incredible fans. Tom changed that, and he became sort of the John Madden of horse racing. And when I got the job at Gulfstream, I followed him at Gulfstream Park, and I was there for 7 years, starting in 2000. People said to me, "You sound a little like Tom Durkin. Are you trying to pattern yourself after Tom?" And I said, the only reason I sound only a little like Tom Durkin is because I'm not good enough to sound exactly like Tom Durkin, because I would have absolutely replicated. The criteria for a great race call is when you, as horse racing fans, hearken back to that race, and part of that experience is the race call. It's like when Terry said arch, 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 or Smarty Jones. Tom Durkin's got 50 of those. The 2 Derby winners hit the wire together. Mike Smith lets the bull roll, but there's cause for concern. The incomparable, the unbeatable, the fantastic cigar. All of these calls, when we think back about those horse races, it's incorporated in the race call itself. That's when you know you've made a good race call. Terry had 10 of those. I have 3. Trevor's got 30. Tom's got 200 of them like that. And so, yeah, and I talk to Tom all the time, because if I get a little off the rails and I need to refocus and continue to try to do a good job, I'll go back to the basics and have him listen to a call or two, and we'll talk about it, and I can get back online. I have a plaque in my booth, because one of the things that I do when I make race calls is I have a tendency to try to do too much. I see a lot that's going on, and most of it I shouldn't say anything about. So I have a plaque in my booth that I look at as the horses are going into the race. Every single race, it says, "Just call the damn race." Instead of trying to add too much to a race call, because when you do that, then that's when you can get in trouble. If you just stay nuts and bolts, when I teach young race callers, nobody is going to long for what you didn't say. They're not going to know what you didn't say. So if you just put the horses where they belong, and you clearly and concisely let everybody know where their horses are and what chance they have of winning, that's a good race call. You don't need to do anything more than that. Nobody's going to want for anything more than that.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give track announcer Vic Stauffer a big round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us.